It wasn't enough to wish for a daughter. I had to beg. There is a certain shop called Fleur in New York City where magical objects can be purchased, rented, stored, or utilized, but only if you have extraordinary means and the right connections. It isn't the sort of place you can simply walk into. Customers can only gain entrance through referral, and all visits are by appointment only. I'm what you might call nouveau riche. No Vanderbilts or Astors populate my family tree, but I've done well for myself, and in the end, money is money. I manage a few important funds, and many of my clients have powerful ties that go back to the days of New Amsterdam. It was one such client that made an introduction for me at Fleur. There was no email or even a phone call, simply a red envelope that arrived with a white card inside, listing my name, an address in Manhattan, and an 8 p.m. appointment. The calligraphy was elegant and precise. It was August, hot, and the sun was just setting behind the tall buildings to the west. I arrived promptly, as I always do, to find a 3-story building built of brown bricks. 2 Grecian columns bordered a white door a few steps above street level, but the place was otherwise unpretentious, ordinary even. I knocked once and heard footsteps shuffling slowly toward the door, which soon opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, dressed plainly in jeans and a loose-fitting white shirt. "You must be Tara," she said. "I'm Ing, the proprietress. Please, follow me." I took a step inside, carefully closing the door behind me. Inside, the house was cozy and clean. I'd expected a crowded maze packed with objects. Instead, we passed an ordinary sitting room with threadbare couches and a kitchen with basic appliances and outdated tile countertops. "It's not what I expected," I said, knowing the words were rude even as they left my mouth. "When I was younger, I was vain," said Ing. She had a bit of a Midwest accent that made me want to discount anything she said. I had plenty of tools at my disposal, and I'd show up at that door glammed up to make men drool and women jealous. In the end, it brought me more trouble than joy. I should have listened to my father. He ran this place for decades before he handed me the keys. He always said it's best to hide in plain sight. Now, I see the wisdom in that. For a moment, something in the periphery of my vision flickered, and in Inga's place, I glanced a much taller, thinner woman in a glittering evening gown. Her red hair shimmered like it had been woven with strands of tinsel and fell halfway down her back. Black and green tattoos snaked down her arms. The inks moved slowly beneath her skin. As I followed her into an austere office, the flicker went away, and I saw the plain version of her again, smiling at me as if we now shared a secret. "So," she said, "I'm aware of your situation. I sympathize." "Do you have children?" I asked, and she shook her head. "I've never wanted them," she said. "It complicates this line of work. Certain clients see fit to threaten your family's safety if they can't get what they want. Things get quite ugly." She said this with an air of someone who'd crossed many dangerous people and come out on top. I thought it best not to inquire further. "I've tried all the normal methods," I said. "Hormones, IUI, IVF." I was trying not to betray any emotion, but I felt my chest constricting. I'd hate myself if I cried in front of this stranger. "I just thought if maybe you had some kind of ointment maybe, or a charm. Jesus, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud." She held out a hand, gesturing for me to do the same. Then she took hold of my wrist and spit in my open palm. I tried to draw it back, but her grip was far stronger than it should have been. She rubbed her thumb in small circles all around my skin until the spit was spread evenly. Then, finally, she released me and slowly nodded. "Unfortunately, none of the usual methods will work in your case," she said. "There's something blocking you." "Blocking me?" I tried not to sound too unduly skeptical. Like a diaphragm, I wanted to add, but I bit my tongue. "Yes, something powerful that even I can't quite see." Now I rolled my eyes. Of course, my bullshit meter was going into hyperdrive. I could almost sense that sales pitch coming. Of course, I had a 1 in a million problem that would require a very expensive solution, right? "Sounds like you can't help me then," I said, standing. "No," she said. "You can help yourself, but only if you want it badly enough. I hesitated for a moment. I could always try the IVF again. A new method was being pioneered down at the Mayo Clinic, something to do with treating the ovaries with stem cells, maybe? But I could only imagine it ending in utter, expensive failure. And then there was the other issue. Marlon, my boyfriend of 8 years, had thrown his hands up at the whole thing, frustrated at my tenacity, which he called obsession. A few days earlier, after our latest fight, he'd stormed out of the apartment without a word and hadn't responded to any of my texts since. "I can help you," she added. I sat down. "I want it more than you could possibly realize," I said. "Many people who show up here believe that," she said. "Some are correct, most aren't." She opened a door and rang a small bell. A few moments later, a thin, red-headed man walked in carrying a roll of fabric over his shoulder. "You don't need a salve to shock your womb into obedience," she said. "You need a wish." "Like from a genie?" I said, almost laughing. "You got Robin Williams' ghost in here?" She smiled thinly, as if humoring a child. "There are such things as beings who can grant boons to humans," she said. "But they don't live in lamps or rings, and they are closer to gods than to that blue monstrosity in Aladdin." She nodded to her companion, who knelt and rolled out the fabric. It was a rug, I realized, or what may have passed for one long ago. The gray fabric was beaten and frayed, and black blocky images of antelopes had faded into almost nothing. "The rug is from the Ubaid period, roughly 4,800 BCE, explained Ings. "Even were it not charmed, it would be one of a kind amongst the oldest textiles in existence. By the same token, it's likely that it had survived for so long precisely because of its supernatural qualities." I had to stop myself from making a joke about magic carpets. Inge looked deadly serious now. "In the popular imagination, magical objects are portrayed as easy fixes," said Inge. "A lamp you rub, or a sword that slices through stone, a carpet that flies. In reality, most enchanted objects can only be activated through extreme effort and determination. They're merely a foot in the door to seeking supernatural aid. The true effort comes from the seeker." "So how does it work?" I asked. "To contact the being tied to this rug, you must kneel on it for 3 days and nights. During that time, you may not sleep, eat, or drink. If you have proven the strength of your resolve after 3 days, the spirit will visit you and your desire. And I can wish for anything? Most wishes are acceptable, but it's good to know ahead of time that there are limits. You cannot use the wish to kill a living thing or to negate the wish of another. Such things are against the nature of the spirit. It is a generous being by nature, looking to grant the heart's desire of the worthy." "My wish is worthy," I said. She nodded. "You will need time to prepare," she said. "I have a room here that I'll set up for your trial. As I said, you will need to be here for 3 days. Come well nourished and hydrated, just after a full night's sleep. Wear loose, comfortable clothes." She paused. "Some clients choose to bring an adult diaper." "You've got to be fucking kidding me," I couldn't help but mutter, but she didn't smile. "The cost is $5 million per day," she said. "Non-refundable." I raised my eyebrows. "I was told money wouldn't be an issue," she said. "It's not," I said, regaining my composure. "I would have to sell some of my crypto holdings, the easiest asset to liquidate on short notice." I started to assess the tax implications in my head. "Good," she said. "Then we'll set a date." I was able to clear a few days in October for the trial. I told my co-workers I was headed to St. Bart's to do a little beach time. Though I hadn't taken a vacation in years, no one questioned it. If anything, they were glad, telling me it seemed like I could use it. I developed a reputation as highly intense, a ballbuster. I think everyone was happy to get a break from me for a few days. I did finally hear from Marlon. He called to let me know he was coming for his things and that he hoped I wouldn't be there when he arrived. It hurt to lose him, but I told myself I was better off moving forward alone. Perhaps I just didn't want to endure the embarrassment of explaining my visit to Fleur and the trial awaiting me. If anything, Marlon was even more of a skeptic than I was. But he wasn't the kind of person who really, truly wanted anything. He'd gone along with the baby plan partly because of me, and partly because it was the thing people did. But I know he never really fantasized about holding a newborn in his arms, taking joy in her little coos and laughs. He was simply along for the ride until things got too hard, and then he wasn't. It was all for the best. If the wish worked as promised, I wouldn't need Marlon or any man. The baby would be all mine. In the days leading up to the trial, I did everything I could to prepare. I caught up on sleep, ate at a small caloric surplus, and did a daily yoga routine to loosen my joints. Embarrassingly, I also prayed to a small statue of Mary my mother had given me as a girl. It was one of the few objects I'd kept from childhood, and I certainly wasn't Catholic anymore, but it felt like it wouldn't hurt. Finally, the day came. I arrived at Fleur and ascended the steps. The door opened before I could even knock, and Ing gestured for me to enter. She was dressed in a sort of white linen uniform with a tan apron. She might have looked at home in a day spa. Indeed, she handed me a glass of ice water with a cucumber floating inside. "It's important to hydrate, and best to empty your bladder before you go in," she said. Then, looking me in the eye, she added, "Is your resolve as strong now as when we last met?" "Stronger," I said honestly, and she nodded. I followed Ing up a winding staircase up to the third level, where a narrow, dimly lit hallway opened to an array of doors. As we walked through the hall, it seemed I could hear groans coming from behind several of the door, strange muttering that sounded like prayer from others. "Busy morning?" I asked. "My client's business is strictly confidential," she said. "Should anyone come asking about you, I'd say the same." I wondered if it was all people kneeling on rugs behind every door. Surely not. Behind each door was a different object, a different aspiration. I had heard rumors of others who'd come here for help. A woman in her 50s, who lay in a glass coffin that superheated her skin, crisping it like a Thanksgiving turkey's. The pain had been unimaginable, but after 2 hours when she emerged from the coffin, her skin was as taut as a 20-year-old's. Another friend had been asked to finger paint portrait after portrait of her dead lover in blood, until finally the 44th one began to move of its own volition and carried out a long and heartfelt conversation that left her happy for the first time in years. "Understood," I said. "Thank you." We reached a door near the end of the hall. She tapped the handle a few times in a kind of rhythmic sequence, then turned it slowly open. On the other side of the door was a barren room with no windows. 2 walls were of bare brick. The others were simple white, the paint chipping in places. At the center of the room stood the rug. It looked slightly more important now, set in the middle of the otherwise barren room, like an exhibit at a museum. I was struck by the feeling that I shouldn't touch it. "Your trial begins as soon as you place your feet on the rug," said Ing. "The spirit will expect you to kneel for the duration of your time here. A bit of stretching from time to time is acceptable, but under no circumstance are you to leave the rug. Should you wish to abandon the trial, simply walk to the door and knock thrice. No negative consequences will befall you, but you will still be expected to pay, and you will not be allowed to attempt the trial again." She paused for a moment. "I should have asked this before," she said. "But as I mentioned, there's some kind of blockage preventing you from having a child. Do you have enemies? Someone who would care enough to curse you?" I tried to think. I'd upset plenty of people in my life, especially at Word. I had ruined certain companies, effectively putting my boot on their necks when they showed the first signs of weakness. I'd sparked selling frenzies that tanked stock prices and ruined small financial empires. An angry tech bro had once pelted me with a milkshake as I left the office. "I don't think any of my enemies believe in this stuff," I said, and she nodded. "Good," she said. "The trial begins now." She walked outside, closing the door behind her. And though I was now the only person in the room, I didn't feel alone at all. The rug had a presence to it, I realized, just not necessarily a human one. Slowly, I removed my heels and circled the rug. The floor was frigid against my bare feet, cold enough to be uncomfortable, yet I found it difficult to will myself to step onto the fabric. Finally, I shook my head. I was being stupid. I would get on the rug. I had never shied away from anything simply because it was hard. This time would be no different. The first few minutes were unremarkable. I knelt on the old fabric and stared blankly at the wall. Years of classes, yoga, bar, Pilates, etc., had trained me for this moment. If anything, when I closed my eyes, I could pretend that I was simply holding child's pose for a bit longer than usual, and that I'd soon be hitting the shower and indulging in a green smoothie. As time wore on, it became harder to maintain this fantasy. My muscles began to ache, and I shifted to other sorts of kneeling. Sometimes with my torso elevated, sometimes lying forward and touching the rug with my fingertips. Initially, the rug had seemed to possess no smell, and I imagined it had dissipated over the course of millennia. Now though, with my mind emptied and my senses heightened, I caught notes of odd scents, a kind of burnt one emanating from the black dye, and a musky earthen one from the fabric itself. Did they have sheep back in the olden days of the Fertile Crescent, or had this been woven from the hair of some other animal? The pain became worse. My lower back and knees throbbed. How long had I been kneeling now? Surely not more than a few hours. Was I really ready to endure this for days? "I'm going to stand and stretch now," I said, feeling like an idiot. "I hope that's okay. That doesn't break the rules, right?" There was no response, and I felt extra stupid. "Okay," I asked one last time. Looking up, I seemed to spy a haze of something at the far end of the room near the wall in front of me. An old woman was sitting in a chair knitting. For a moment, she looked up from her work and met my eye. Then she slowly nodded, giving me permission. Carefully unbending my knees, I stood. The relief was immediate. The fire that had been burning in my joints went out as if doused with a bucket of water. "This is still the easy part," said the old woman quietly from the far side of the room. "If you don't have the will to continue, better to quit now. There's no prize for quitting halfway or even at the 3/4 mark." "You've never met anyone with a will like mine," I said. She snorted a little and went back to her knitting. "Kneel," she said quietly, and then she disappeared. The pain grew worse, and if it was just pain, it might have been easy. But your mind plays tricks on you when you hurt. It'll tell you that you're doing permanent injury to your knees and ankles. It'll ask if the tingling sensation in your toes is nerve damage. Could your spine itself be in jeopardy? Will you still be able to walk at the end of all this? But through all of it, I didn't stop kneeling. Every time an intrusive thought arose, I made myself think of my daughter. At times, it was almost as if I could see her. In the vision, though, she wasn't a baby, but a woman fully grown, perhaps even my same age. She stood behind the old woman, a hand on her shoulder. She stared at me as if looking for something, perhaps wondering if I'd soon give up, if she'd never come to exist. This wasn't the first time I'd seen my daughter. Since I was a teenager, I've had vivid dreams about her. Us, at high tea and matching dresses, arguing the merits of English breakfast and Earl Grey. Me at her college graduation, my eyes welling with tears as she collects her Princeton diploma. Me popping a bottle of champagne to celebrate her putting the down payment on her first apartment, a little one-bedroom in Brooklyn. It was all so clear that it seemed inevitable. Like the dreams were a reality just waiting for me once I reached the proper time. I knew I was destined to become the mom that my own mother never was. Yes, my mother was a disaster. She'd moved to New York from rural Virginia, assuming she'd be discovered by some producer at the cafe where she worked and book her ticket to Broadway. Every morning, she spent an hour in the mirror preparing for her big break, but it never came. Instead, there was only an endless procession of men, some with promises of fame and fortune, but mostly just a string of losers that grew increasingly dangerous. I don't like to talk much about that period of my life, except to say that it was terrible and not something I'd wish on anyone. It all ended when I was 12 and came home from school to find her half dead off a bag of gray powder, lying on the couch beside her fully dead boyfriend. I went to live with one of her cousins in Brooklyn after that. She had 2 daughters of her own and worked almost constantly. To her credit, I wasn't treated any worse than her biological children, but that's not saying much. At best, we were all seen as burdens, but at least I was safe. I suppose it made me tough and eager to be nothing like my mother. I grew up hating her and had very little contact with her once I stopped living at her place. At some point, I heard that she died falling from a balcony, an act that may have been self-inflicted or at the hands of a jealous boyfriend, though the truth was never discovered. I chose not to attend the funeral. I suppose I was driven to be my mother's opposite in every way. Through high school, my grades were perfect, and I never dated. I told myself that when I was older, I would give my daughter the things I never had. A clean apartment looking over the park, and I stable dad who never drank and woke up early each morning to brew coffee and read the news. A mother who loved her above all other things. I looked up at the old woman. My daughter's shade stooped down and whispered something in her ear. "What?" I asked, attempting to bend my head up to look at them. I realized I barely had the strength to do so. How long had I been here now? I had no phone, no watch. The room had no windows. It could have been the first day or the second. Certainly not the third. "She says that you could never love her above all other things," the old woman muttered. "You love yourself too much." Had they read my thoughts? "What does she know?" I asked. "She doesn't know me. She's not even real." My daughter crossed her arms and stared daggers. I should mention that not all of my dreams about my daughter had been good ones. There had been nightmares too. Me arriving home to find her, 16 and in bed with an older boyfriend. Me, screaming and hitting her over and over again, shouting that she'd end up like my mom, and more like this. My daughter coming home with a B+ on a report card, or missing curfew by half an hour as a junior in high school. It always ended with me screaming, reminding her that a single step on the path to failure was one too many. I would wake from these dreams full of anger at her, incredulous that my imagined daughter could betray me in such a way. At some point, my right knee gave out. I wasn't sure if the joint had ruptured permanently or if it just needed some rest, but there was physically no way I could make it hold position. I collapsed face first onto the rug and looked up at the old woman as if to ask if this was acceptable. She nodded almost imperceptibly, at some point that I had soiled myself. Not quite sure what to do, I removed the stained pants and underwear and tossed them to the side of the room. Then, for whatever reason, I removed my shirt as well, throwing it after the others. I lay curled in a naked ball, looking weakly up at the old woman, who kept busy with her knitting. "How long?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Beside her, my daughter never took her eyes off me. She was smirking just a bit, reveling in my pain. She was the bad girl, the one I'd seen in my dreams. She would disobey me. I would come home from work to find her in a cloud of pot smoke listening to an old Nirvana album, and I would rip the buds from her ears and smash them underfoot over and over again until they were plastic dust. "Give up," she mouthed. "Never," I tried to say, but my lips were chapped and bleeding, and the words caught in my throat. I knew then that I would amend my wish. I would wish for a good daughter. Not her, not the brat looking down at me from the old woman's side. I tried to give voice to these thoughts, to shout them at my daughter, and found I could not. For the first time, I felt a pang of true fear. Not that I would give up, but that I would die here, naked on this rug, before I had a chance to make my wish. There had been no promise that I would live. How long could the body go without water? I would have drunk from a gutter or a horse trough were it in front of me. Anything. Shadows were dancing all around the room, a great revel, all ready to carry me off to somewhere dark and permanent. I knew I could make them go away. I could roll off the rug, crawl to the door, beg to be let out, but I would not. I would never, never relent. My daughter shook her head. "See?" she said. "She'll never bend." The old woman looked up at me and nodded, and I realized that the rug had extended now, growing longer. It reached all the way to the old woman, stretching out to her feet and up her legs, all the way to the needles in her lap that were knitting it longer and longer. She gestured for me to come closer, and I began to crawl, naked and chapped. My right knee fully numb, I dragged myself to her feet. "Tell me what you desire," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "You know," I said. "You need to say it." "A daughter," I said. "My perfect daughter." She thought for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "I cannot help you. The rules are the rules." "What are you talking about?" I choked as I asked the question, my throat dry and painful. "Your wish cannot negate the wish of another," she said softly. "I don't understand," I said. What was she talking about? The woman held up the bits of yarns in her lap. They seemed to vibrate, the dancing threads throwing darkness on the wall like shadow puppets. In these shadows, a vision formed. It was my daughter years in the future, my same age. She was here in this very room, kneeling on this very same rug. Time moved in fast motion as I watched her suffer just as I had, her body breaking down, her mind drying into a husk as the lack of sleep and water broke it. But in the end, she too survived the trial. She too crawled to the old woman to make her wish. "I don't want to die," she said through chapped lips, "but I wish I was never born. Could you do that for me?" The old woman looked up at her curiously. "Perhaps. Why is this your wish?" "Because I have never been happy, not one day in my life," my daughter said, blinking away tears. "I had a mother who screamed at me for the slightest misstep. She demanded perfection, and I tried to give it to her. I gave her everything she wanted. I went to Yale, then Harvard Medical School. There's no better doctor in the city. But every day, I come home and wish I'd die in my sleep. I haven't spoken to my mom in years, but I still hear her screaming. The second I start to feel happy, she's right there in my ear telling me I don't deserve an ounce of joy in my life." The old woman nodded. "I can give you what you wish," she said. "Wait," said my daughter. "If you grant the wish, what happens?" The old woman gestured to the work in her lap. "It would be a bit of bother," she said. "I'd have to unravel this a bit." She gestured to the yarn in her lap, still attached to the rug. 38 years worth of work back to the time of your conception. I'd nudge things just a little bit. A different baby would fill her belly." "No," said my daughter, fighting back tears. "No, no, no. No one else should have to do this, to live this." She thought for a moment, then said, "I want to wish for my mother to be barren, incapable of having a child, ever." The old woman smiled a bit sadly and nodded. She began to pull at the thread in her lap, unraveling the rug. "Anything else?" "Yes," said my daughter. "One day, I want her to find out why." The old woman looked over at me now, then over at my daughter's specter. She shot me one last cruel smile, a look of satisfaction. Then she turned and walked through the darkness of the wall. She would not return. "Do you understand?" asked the old woman. "I can't allow your wish to undo hers." "I understand." "Is there anything else I can offer you?" she asked. I shook my head. She looked up from her knitting one last time. "You may yet think of something," she said. "Come back any time. You know where to find me." Inga must have entered the room shortly after. She gave me a glass of water, which I drank desperately, and a fresh robe. She took me to a shower, where I sat and cried on the wet floor. My skin was so broken that I could barely handle the lukewarm temperature. My knee throbbed, but had regained a bit of its function. I saw that I would be whole again, physically at least. Since that day, I've been at home, slowly repairing myself. Long baths, lunches of chicken broth and juice cut with water. But I can't bring myself to call work, or anyone really. I feel that the motor has been ripped out of me, that there's nothing to make me go anymore. What is a life without a purpose? I am not someone accustomed to drifting. And of course, I've been angry, at my daughter and at myself. But there's nowhere for those feelings to go, nothing to do with them. I can't undo the mother I was in some other fabric of reality. I am stuck, but at the same time, I have no desire to die. And lately, my thoughts have turned to my own mother, who I suppose made me this way. As I said before, so much of who I am came as a reaction to who she was. I think of the way she cackled when she was high. It was a selfish laugh, a laugh you couldn't share. Late at night, I find myself waking impossibly thirsty, but I do not drink. Instead, I kneel on the bed and stare into the darkness, and I think I see the old woman sitting there. I imagine crawling to her and whispering that I too wish my mother had been barren, that I too want her to know why. I imagine the old woman unraveling another few decades from her work to go back and fix things. And in my reverie, I sometimes hope that I won't be the last one to make this wish, that my mother will do the same, wishing her mother barren, and then on until each bad mother through the centuries is erased along with history itself, the whole rug disappearing as the old woman pulls the thread until all traces of humanity are wiped away, leaving nothing but a pile of tangled yarn. Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.